people are doing. So, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, I think this might just be one of my absolute favorites that has come out this year. On the other hand, we have the X100 Ultra. You see, this has a lot of interesting things going on about it. A lot of decisions that Vivo has taken which sometimes give it an edge. Other times, it could actually detract from it, its performance. But here's the thing, I get it. The iPhone has come out and I haven't really made a video about it. It's coming real soon. I have the samples ready, and the next comparison for that reason is going to be the X100 Ultra versus the iPhone 16 Pro. It's going to be bloody interesting, I'm telling you right now, so if that is something you're interested in, well, consider subscribing. For now, let's jump in. So as usual, we have the color profiles, and these are the vibrant color profiles or vivid colors, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, they do exactly what the name suggests, and personally, I'm not the biggest fan of them. I prefer natural colors, I prefer high contrast, and obviously you can use whatever you want. That's entirely up to you. That's the whole point of having color profiles, is to give you, the consumers, the choice. On the other hand, with Zeiss natural colors, we get some of the most natural and beautiful color tones that you could ever hope for. I think it's about as good as it can possibly get on any device in terms of natural colors that we get on the X100 Ultra. There's really nothing else quite like it. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra, on the other hand, you see this one does give you like authentic, but it's not always perfectly natural with the color tones. The saturation is good, the contrast is actually high most of the time, and I do like that, but the color tones can be a little problematic. We'll get into it. And then we have textured mode on the X100 Ultra. You see, in a flat looking condition like in this one, you can get some very nice looking shots, but when you have some natural contrast in the scene, then it can be overbearing very easily, and it doesn't really handle dynamic range all that well. So because of the inconsistency, I would always recommend using Zeiss natural colors actually. And so here's the thing about the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. You see, what it does is it gives you a lot of contrast, and it can help out in various situations, but I have found out that in certain scenes where the higher contrast is present on the Xiaomi, it looks kind of nice, but I think it detracts from the type of shot that I'm trying to capture. Like, I'm trying to capture the sunset and the fact that everything looks kind of dark and gloomy right after the sun has set. And that's not really what we're getting from the Xiaomi. It just looks very different from when I shot it and the type of colors that we had when I took the photo. Not exactly authentic, I guess. And then another little issue that I have with the Xiaomi's color tones specifically is that it really just drains out the warmth from any image. You can see on the X100, it is using Zeiss natural colors and it is producing basically perfect color tones, and the warmth that we were getting from the sunlight, it is perfectly present. Not the case on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It's very different, the type of images that we're getting here. However, that is not to say that the X100 doesn't screw up. There are various moments that it has. This is one of those examples. It's just a simple fact that every phone will have problems, nothing is perfect, and neither is the X100. And then we have the backlit shot. I get it, it's not the most challenging shot. The sun is almost setting entirely. It's running out of time, alright? I can do much about it. Now, here's the thing. I really like the contrast that we're getting on the Xiaomi. Personally, I've always liked high contrast. On the other hand, we have the X100 Ultra, which is preserving the color tones and the warm tones from the sunset so insanely well. It's like 100% accurate. It doesn't have as much contrast. Anyways, I think that's about enough for the main cameras, right? Let's jump into the ultrawide, and the ultrawide is very simple. It's basically what you're seeing with the main camera. That's essentially what you're gonna get with the ultrawide. Both are very similar. The Xiaomi does get wider though. That's the one advantage I feel it has, but personally I think the colors just look so much better on the X100 that in my personal opinion it's just gonna do better. And I have also noticed that in various cases the X100 does seem to have a really good amount of contrast, to the point that it doesn't even feel like I need like authentic or the very high contrast that it provides. Hell, if anything at all, with some of the lighting conditions that I shot in, the Xiaomi was actually overbearing with the contrast, which is not exactly a good thing. And I think this particular shot, it is by far the most challenging shot because of just the way the scene was lit. And the X100, it's doing a perfect job. See, this is what I'm talking about with the color tones and the way Vivo has just, they've gone above and beyond in just ensuring that the processing can handle just about any lighting condition. These are some of the worst cases that you could shoot in. The Xiaomi is struggling a lot. It's crushing shadows, the sky, I don't even know what's going on. It looks complete whack. The X100 on the other hand is producing basically a perfect shot. Moving on, however, we have the zoom test. Now, here's the thing, here's the prediction that I have. I haven't seen all of these images, at least I haven't analyzed them yet, I've just seen sneak peeks, let's just say. And I'm gonna say that the X100 Ultra is gonna pull ahead in basically every single one of them, despite the fact that the Xiaomi has an optical zoom advantage. So let's see if I'm right or not. And so for the 2X, by the way, these are 500% crops, that's how we're gonna analyze them. I think the X100 has slightly more detail as opposed to the Xiaomi, and maybe touch less sharpening or artifacting that I can see. It's a minor difference in that department, but the detail is definitely high on the X100. But then the 3X, you see, from this point onwards, we have some insane and genuinely challenging conditions that I've shot in. Because, look, I just feel like the X100 has one of the highest quality telephoto camera that I've ever used, and for that reason, I think it needs to be pushed to the limits. And it will also give us an idea as to just how well the Xiaomi can cope up. And well, let's just say that it really cannot. It is a good sensor that it has, it's good telephoto camera that we have on the Xiaomi, but it really can't handle the situation, especially when the lighting is as, well, challenging as it was when I took the shot. The X100 is performing, well, a little bit better than I expected, to be honest. But then for the 5X, you see, this is where the Xiaomi has a massive advantage with the optical zoom. By far, I've always noticed that when you have optical zoom, it's just always going to perform better, especially when the lighting gets problematic. Like in this case, this is a near backlit shot that I've taken. And yeah, the Xiaomi is maybe crushing shadows a little too much, but that's a whole different thing. How about the details? So it turns out that even in challenging conditions, the X100 Ultra, that is zooming in digitally from the 3X optical zoom, it can produce just as much detail as the 5X, which is again a very high quality camera that we have on the Xiaomi, and somehow it also has less grain than the Xiaomi, which is yeah, that's a win in my books if I've ever seen one. If that doesn't convince you, if you're still feeling like, oh well, maybe that was a fluke, let me take you to again one of the most challenging shots in this comparison. It was low light. We had digital lights in there. The lighting was not favorable, not in the slightest. It's a 10x zoom. It was after sunset, and still, I think you can very easily tell the X100 is definitely doing a better job. Now, the problems, or rather the issues in terms of the situation in which we shot it, the lighting and all that jazz, is definitely catching up, and it is causing a lot of artifacting and software processing that we can visibly see on the X100, but it's night and day difference between the Xiaomi and the X100. Once again, remember, the Xiaomi is the one that has the optical zoom advantage. Anyway, with that said, let us check out the high res. First and foremost, we have the main camera, and I think this is going to be pretty similar on both. And well, zooming in is very close on both, but there is a difference. The Xiaomi has less processing and less detail, as opposed to the X100, which is taking the opposite approach. It has more detail, but also more processing and slight bits of sharpening that I can see. But then of course, the 3X and anything beyond, I feel like at this point we know exactly how this is gonna go. So let's breeze past it, shall we? So first and foremost, we have 50 megapixels, and of course, the X100 is gonna pull ahead. It did better with the regular shot, but the high res is just gonna do even better. Once again, these are very challenging lighting conditions, and it is still performing admirably. Then of course we have 200 megapixels. I think this is the only camera that I've used which utilizes 200 megapixels properly. And I don't get to say that very often. Case in point right here, it is producing slightly more detail, it is doing the right thing and not introducing as much sharpening as we saw with the 50 megapixels. That's the right way to use 200 megapixels, by the way. Now see, this is where the real test comes in. We are shooting at 50 megapixels with 5x on the Xiaomi, so it has an optical zoom advantage. But on the X100, we are shooting at 200 megapixels from 3.7x, so it has a resolution advantage. Now here's another thing. The colors are looking about 100 times better on the X100 Ultra. I don't know what's going on with the colors on the Xiaomi, but it just does not look nice. Now cropping in, and yes, I am matching the framing on the Xiaomi and the X100 so that we're getting 500% crop on the Xiaomi and we have to crop way more on the X100. I don't exactly remember how much it was, so don't ask. But the details are actually higher on the X100 Ultra. Do I need to say more? Hell, it's even got less grain and artifacting as opposed to the Xiaomi. Like, how insane is that? Anywho, with that said, let us just jump on over to the front camera. You see, this is going to be slightly more interesting because here, What we have is the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, which gives you really nice looking selfies obviously, but it also has a wider field of view, which I personally am a massive fan of. I prefer wider field of view by a huge margin. On the other hand, the X100 Ultra, it looks good. It can sometimes blow out highlights, especially when it's on your face or something like that. It's a weird inconsistency that I've noticed. But it also seems to give you a lot of reddish skin tones, which I'm not the biggest fan of. And it's a very similar story here. The reason I prefer the Xiaomi is simply because of just how accurate the skin tones are. I'm not sure why it keeps giving me these very reddish skin tones, especially in this particular comparison. It seems to be much more the case. It could be because I shot these during sunset and the X100 is just struggling with the red channel, but yeah, it's problematic. And then this was shot right after sunset, which is why it was, I guess, semi-low light, not enough to take a night shot, but enough for both phones to struggle. Because I do see some smudging of details, especially along my beard on the X100 Ultra, and it's also present on the Xiaomi, but it's not affected as much or as badly as opposed to the X100. Now then, for the classic backlit selfie, I kind of like how the X100 is handling the sun. I'm not really the biggest fan of the way it looks on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, but I do think that the red is way too overboard on the X100. And then of course, selfie portraits. Now, the X100 Ultra, it does have that reddish skin tone issue still going on. That's still there. I don't know why it's still there, but it is. But damn, look at that edge detection. It is something else. Just take a look at my ear. It's being absolutely virtually molested over there with the edge detection. But you know, this is what bothers me and almost entirely blows my mind into smithereens. The X100 Ultra is now performing really well with the edge detection as opposed to the previous shot, even though this is lower light and this is more challenging. Definitively more challenging as opposed to the previous one. I mean, just look at the details. They're so much more smeared up on both phones. But the edge detection improved on the X100. And then finally we have the backlit portrait. I once again do really kind of like how the X100 is handling the highlight in the scene. But the overall look, the contrast, the skin tones specifically on the Xiaomi, they just look so much better that I think the selfie camera is a win for the Xiaomi. But then jumping over to rear camera portraits, you see, this is where things are going to be very interesting because the Xiaomi provides us with two fairly unique modes for taking these shots. You have the master portraits, which will be slightly more natural looking, less contrast, and maybe sometimes more flattering, a safer option. But then you have Leica portraits, which I'm a pretty big fan of, because it gives you a lot of contrast and really beautiful roll off with the highlights in most cases. Sometimes there will be inconsistencies, and in general, as you'll notice as we go forward, the X100 Ultra just has more consistency and it will almost 100% of the time provide a near perfect portrait, as opposed to the Xiaomi, which sometimes will produce fantastic looking results, like insane and beautiful stuff, but other times it might struggle a little. It might maybe overdo the contrast, maybe even undershoot the contrast, give you a flat result, especially when you're using master portraits. The inconsistency is higher on the Xiaomi, but you also get the options. And those options can sometimes lead to results that are actually definitively better than what the X100 is producing. But consistency, as I mentioned, can be a problem. And in this case, it's very obvious. As you can see, the Xiaomi is not looking particularly nice. It looks a little blown out in some of the highlights on my face, as opposed to the X100, which by far has been producing near perfect results. But then when you use Leica portraits, it just goes completely overboard. It looks very digital and it looks weird when I look at it, as opposed to the X100, which again looks stunning to say the least. And in this case, even though the contrast looks really nice on both, the skin tone is going completely overboard. This time on the Xiaomi, the red is absolutely insane. But weirdly enough, the problem fixes itself with Leica portraits for some reason. Even though in the previous shot, we had the Leica portrait giving us way too much contrast and just blowing out highlights. So as I mentioned, inconsistency can be a problem. And then finally we have the backlit portrait. I'd say that it looks very nice on both. There's not really much to complain about, except for the fact that I kinda like how the highlight is being handled, how it's being just turned into a bokeh ball on the X100 Ultra, as opposed to the Xiaomi, which still looks like it's a proper highlight, proper sun in the background. I don't know, I just find it interesting. Now with Leica Authentic, you do get a lot more contrast, which I do kinda like. I like how it just makes every texture pop, and it just looks really nice, to my eyes at least. I like high contrast, if you couldn't tell already. But here's the thing, I think there's too much yellow in the sunlight or the sunset on the Xiaomi as opposed to too much red on the X100 Ultra. Neither is particularly accurate. Then finally we have the good old-fashioned night portraits. Now overall, I think both can be really good, but the X100 more often than not can produce slightly better results, and it can in general produce more detail as well. Now in these particular cases, I do think that the Xiaomi is handling the blue light so much better. It's balancing it out in a magnificent fashion. The X100 is struggling way more, but except for the oversaturation with the blue light, I'd say the overall images, or rather the skin tones, the contrast, the details, they all look slightly better on the X100 Ultra. And now finally we have night mode. Now the Xiaomi makes this very interesting because we once again get options. You can choose between Leica Vibrant and Leica Authentic. Now in general, when I take photos in the city, I've noticed that even Leica Vibrant can look really nice in very high contrast, really dark night skies, so on and so forth. And even the X100, which tends to brighten night skies a lot, it can have a tendency to produce really nice high contrast results, which is a very good thing, in my books at least. In general, I personally prefer to shoot with Leica Authentic way more because it just gives us such beautiful, realistic, nighttime looking shots. With the ultrawide camera on the other hand, now this is one of those examples where the X100 just goes completely and entirely overboard. Like, look at the night sky, and then look at what it should have really looked like on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It's yeah, that's what I call a disaster. I don't like the way it looks on the X100. But then in this case, it looks fine. It looks perfect. Just about as good as I would expect from the X100 Ultra. The Xiaomi, as expected, is also performing just as well. It is producing beautiful night sky. But yeah, interesting. That's all there is. But then in this case, see, this is something interesting. So here the X100 Ultra is producing a really nice shot. We have a lot of detail in the shadows, but it's not going overboard, it's not giving us a flat result. The Xiaomi on the other hand, it decided to kind of underexpose, especially in the shadows. I mean, you can see a lot of them are just being crushed entirely. And that's not really a good look, no, is it? It's a challenging shot, obviously, but that's the whole point. But then, what about zoom at night? You see, this is once again the area where I think the X100 is just gonna pull ahead based off of just how insanely well it performed with daylight and also the high res. So at 2x, it most definitely puts it as opposed to the Xiaomi. See, at low light, I had actually expected there to be less difference between the two, but it seems there's even more of a difference. The Xiaomi really struggles with low light images, even though I think the subject was fairly well lit. Anyway, let's move on to the 3x and see how it performs there. Now, I do want to point out once again, the night sky looks so much better on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra as opposed to the X100, which looks a little too dull. But in terms of detail, there's really no two ways about it. The X100 Ultra is miles ahead. And I get it, the 3x is obviously going to be better on the X100 given just the sheer quality that it has, but what about 5x? The Xiaomi is supposed to have the optical zoom advantage, and let's face it, above all else, in low light, the one thing we have known to be a fact for a very long time is that optical zoom will always triumph as opposed to any kind of digital zoom or any digital processing that we can have for a long range zoom. Having said that though, I think this might just be the very first time that I can very easily say the X100 Ultra, with its 3.7x insanely high quality sensor and the insanely well tuned processing done by Vivo, it triumphs over the optical zoom advantage that has been present for forever. I haven't seen this kind of performance from just a singular telephoto camera to date. And so with that said, that brings us to the end of this comparison. So here's the thing, this is going to be a very long one, but there is something else. I didn't manage to properly test out really harsh backlit conditions with the X100 Ultra because I found later on that that is something it struggles with. I don't have samples here, but I did talk about it previously in the Pixels comparison, and I'll talk about it again in the next one, the iPhones comparison. So if that is something you're interested in, please consider subscribing. But here's the thing, I feel in terms of photography specifically, the X100 is definitely pulling ahead. Now obviously I'm not testing out pro modes or the raw photography. That doesn't make sense to test out, you can just do whatever you want on the Xiaomi especially. If that's something you're interested in, this comparison is not really for you. But in general, for regular photography, I feel like with the sheer balance that the X100 has, it has issues. Yes, with the red skin tones and so on and so forth, it has problems. But everything else, especially the zoom and the capabilities that it has with the zoom, is really something else. So yeah, With that said, I'll see you guys sooner with the iPhone's comparison. Cheers!